up until you were older. Story 1. Apparently, healthy conflict resolution doesn't involve complete avoidance in the form of locking yourself in the bedroom for days on end. I got ridiculed for pouting, but I wasn't taught how to manage bad feelings or situations, so I just did what I could. It wasn't until years later I realized I was copying my parents. Me too, I was scolded for pouting, stomping feet, and being sad. I ended up avoiding all of those when I grew up and became secretive of my emotions. And then they would get mad at me for not opening up. Story 2. Anytime I felt hurt by a conflict with a friend, my parents would tell me to never talk to them again because they aren't real friends anyway. I ghosted all of my best friends thinking it was the right thing to do. Now, I know that real friends talk things out, and it makes the friendships even stronger. A very painful realization. I never even considered my parents could have been wrong. Similar situation. A female friend of mine came out to me as gay in middle school. I told her I was okay with it. Didn't think anything of it and told my dad later on that. He immediately freaked out and made me call said friend and tell her I couldn't be her friend anymore. I still remember hearing the pain in her voice when she asked me why. Years later, my dad was diagnosed as bipolar BPD, and I saw that friend who had since transitioned. Still wish we were friends because he's cool AF. Maddox, if you're reading this, I love you, bro. Story 3. My dad was teaching me about credit cards and said you can just make the minimum payment every month. It blew my mind, made it seem like free money. Thank God I didn't take that advice. I pay my credit card off every month and he's drowning in credit card debt. What an odd take. This is pretty much the highest legal interest you're likely to be charged in your entire life. Generally speaking, unless you owe a loan shark or something, there is nothing worse to carry a balance on than a credit card debt from a financial perspective. Story 4. After arguing with a girlfriend and not speaking with her for a few days, both my parents told me separately to hold on to my beef with her like a grudge and I'll use it against her later. I've been married to the girlfriend now 25 years this year. Never once took my parents' advice and have no idea how my parents' marriage survived, LOL. How do you have such a strong relationship with your wife? Well, see, I take whatever advice my parents give me and do the complete opposite. So far, it's done stellar work in our relationship. Story 5. My parents told me that I had a limited number of words and when I got to that limit, I would die. I guess it was an easy way to make me shut up. My mom used to say that to me as well. She used to get really mad at me if she felt like I asked a dumb question and would say that I was making her use possibly her last breath. Like she might need that breath one day, and now she's wasted on me. Story 6. If you're sad, that means the devil is inside you and you need to pray for forgiveness. I was 6 and my cat had just died. Evangelical parents don't do empathy or teaching how to grieve well. When my beloved cat, a stray who had chosen me, sneezed and died suddenly. As an adult, I think she probably had an aneurysm. My mom thought it was a demonic attack, so we went out in the darkness and cold of a December morning to anoint the house with oil, adding a nice dose of fear and anxiety to my loss. Story 7. That the police were going to come and take me away unless I hid. Nothing sinister, it's him. He just thought it was funny. One time my dad actually made me and my brother pack our belongings into suitcases, loaded them in the car, and drove us nearly 30 minutes away while telling us he was going to leave us at the orphanage because he couldn't deal with us anymore. I think I was like 7 or 8 years old and kept crying because I couldn't remember my mom's phone number, so I thought she would just never know what happened to us. I tell it sometimes like it's a funny story, but that's capital T trauma. My dad used to tell this joke. Hey, you want a kid, only $20? I'll give you $20 if you take him. Ha ha ha. He would recycle that joke a lot. It fucked me up really badly. My mother would threaten to put me up for adoption semi-regularly when she was frustrated with me as a young child. Now that I'm middle-aged, I really shouldn't be surprised that I always feel like a burden, constantly trying to make my footprint as small as possible. Story 8. My dad told me he could drink beer in the car if he drank it while the car was stopped. It's only drinking and driving if the car is in motion. It made sense. I was around 4. Story 9. My dad got me a job when I was 18, so I'd drive in with him. On the way home, he would be in line for the liquor store. Half pint and 2 Budweisers on a 30-minute ride home, 5 times a week. I thought this was just what people did after work or home. Crazy. The drink took him during COVID. He was a high-functioning alcoholic for many years. But in the end, that's all he wanted to do. R.I.P. Ronnie B. Story 10. When I was 7, my uncle was doing while I was staying over, and I told him that my mom said never to do drugs. And he said, you're allowed to do cocaine because rich people do it. Luckily, I never got a chance to do cocaine, but I totally thought it made sense. It's the most addictive thing ever short term, like until it runs out, or the collective money of whoever's there runs out. Turns people weird in different ways. My family did a lot of drugs my whole life. I'm 6 years sober now, but did heroin for 10 years and coke, which is worse, and meth and all the rest of the bullshit. But coke takes the cake for people turning into animals in the moment, but heroin, fent, benzo, etc. are all more the most addictive thing ever than coke. Still, coke is plenty addicting and insidious on its own. Def nothing nice about it. Everyone in the equation except my dad and myself are dead. Mom, 2 uncles, aunt, best friend, good friends, drug friends, and literally countless other souls, both beautiful and tortured, or mean and thriving, or both. It's a story that no one will ever really know except the people who lived it, and maybe some people they know. It's a hell of a story. Multiple murders by 2 different now-deceased family members. Multiple armed robberies, many B&Es. Went to Hawaii for 3 years trying to outrun it and wound up amongst the homeless in less than a year. And I guess that's really just the tip of the iceberg. But everyone who did the crimes has passed, and the few of us left are sober and somehow still alive. My mom gave me my first OC at age 16, and the rest was history. But I guess it's just one more former junkie's life amongst a never-ending sea of former and active junkies, all living in fucking pandemonium. I'm just glad I'm still here. Got an incredible wife who deals with a lot and is incredibly patient and full custody of my son. A license, which was something I thought I'd never have, and all the rest of the bullshit that comes with being a regular good little worker bee. Death and taxes, yeah? Such is life. Story 11. If you ignore bullies, they will go away. They're just jealous of you. Yeah, I hated that. No, Mom, they aren't. I'm a fat, white, poor kid with an oddly huge head and no social skills in a neighborhood of rich Asians and Mexicans. They have nothing to be jealous of. Story 12. Not exactly a lesson, but when I was 8, I had some difficulty speaking clearly, and my father, who was still married to my mother, wanted to take me to a specific therapist. In the end, the therapist was a woman that he wanted to seduce for a long time, and I was the way to do it. By the way, in the end, I just needed an orthodontist for my issue. This is something that, for me, was fucked up, and I will never forget it. Story 13. Keep secrets to protect the family, no matter what they are. Story 14. Do not ever be a bother to anyone. Solve all your problems by yourself. It really hit me when we were walking on a wide sidewalk. A group approached and my mom shoved me off onto the grass, even though the group had plenty of room. Your own kid gets body checked so you don't even have the appearance of slightly inconveniencing stranger. Oof, I feel this one. My parents paired it with always be accommodating to others. Made it so I had very few boundaries and always tried to help others even when I didn't want to but could never ask or accept help when offered. Not a great mix for the abusive relationships I faced as I got older. Story 15. There's a crazy bitch that buys children's baby teeth for $1. Story 16. If someone ever touches you, hit them back. And don't stop hitting until they stop moving. My dad, who is facing his 3rd attempted murder charge. Story 17. During a car ride, my dad once explained to me the concept of micro-murder. It was the idea that the seconds spent in traffic behind someone driving below the speed limit and other instances of people inconveniencing you were seconds of your life that you couldn't get back and should be upset about. I realized as an adult that he's got some issues and just needed an excuse to resent random people on the street. Story 18. I always had anxiety as a child, and my mother said the only way to get over it is to deal with the situation head on. Sounds great until I told her my fear of escalators, and she pushed me down and I fell and almost got my hair caught. Another thing she loved to teach me is how self-defense is necessary. Great. She said being with my abusive ex was enough of a lesson. I should have learned then. My daughter developed a fear of escalators as a teen. We were at the airport deciding between an elevator and escalator. We stood looking and trying to gain the courage to use the escalator. A woman with 2 suitcases goes up. One suitcase must have been heavy and it pulled her backward down the stairs. She got caught somehow and couldn't get up. She rode up backward on her butt, being pulled by suitcases. No words were spoken as we turned and took the elevator. Story 19, definitely not as bad as a lot of these other ones. And I know it wasn't done on purpose to be malicious, but to eat when I was sad or upset. It's easier and faster to tell a kid to go eat something as a distraction than it is to sit down and deal with it, especially if said kid is upset a lot due to living in abusive environments, getting bullied at school, etc. It definitely really fucked up my relationship with food, leading to emotional eating, overweight turning into obesity, even more bullying, disordered eating, and other mental health issues. I realized probably 15 years ago that this was an issue, the cause of it. But even though I know that, it's still something I'm working on unlearning. Story 20. Situation awareness, what seems odd or out of place. Felt like I was being trained by Batman when I realized what he was doing. Dad's from a rough part of Mexico with a lot of narco gang wars, so he was just teaching me to read if a place or a situation was out of the ordinary. My dad's your average run-of-the-mill engineer, but he was poor during his childhood and got into college because of scholarships. So, since he lived in a rough neighborhood, he also always insisted about being observant, situation awareness. Pay attention to what you're doing and where you're going when out in the streets, etc. Same thing. Story 21. Emotional self-sufficiency. In other words, don't show your emotions, don't feel your emotions, don't be swayed by others' emotions. Empathy is bad, and for the weak, basically also reinforced these teachings by making me have to do bloody and demoralizing tasks, carrying entrails barehanded without being allowed to use buckets or killing animals. Lots of physical punishment, Verbal abuse, isolation from others. Stepmother insisted I should remain pure. So when the rapture took place, I would be a warrior saint. Yeah, when I moved out and found out people don't have to live like this, it took me a week just to decompress what I escaped from story 22. Not me, but someone I know was told growing up that only sluts use condoms. Yes, their parents told them this when they were growing up. Story 23, men use their head and hands for the will of God. Women use their hearts and bodies for the will of man. Story 24. My dad instilled crippling perfectionism in me, which I realized was insane when I got older and people told me to just do my best. When I was in grade school, I would come to my dad with A's all super excited. But if it was anything less than a 100%, he would ask for the missing percentage. So when I had a 98%, he'd say, "Well, where's the 2%?" And now, if I do anything less than perfect, I beat myself up. Story 25. Load your bullets into the magazine with gloves on so you don't leave prints. Always thought it was to keep the oil from your fingers off them. Story 26. My grandma told me that June bugs would crawl in my ear, eat through my eardrum, and lay eggs in my brain. There wasn't an unless you put your hands over your ears. It was just a fact. I still put my hands over my ears if there are lots of flying bugs around. ETA. My mom taught me how to break into a house with a driver's license. My uncle told me how to stop a bully by punching them in the throat as hard as I could. My grandma told me cats are the devil and eat their kittens since heads for fun. Story 27, that parents are completely infallible. Know exactly what's best for you, should never be questioned, and you should do everything they ask you to do, including being effectively a slave. Story 28, how to lie or avoid situations where truthful responses would get me in trouble. Anytime I spoke up about anything, really, I'd be ridiculed and put down by my mother, so I stopped talking. If I told her something good happened at school, she'd ask why I was still getting such bad grades, so I just stopped talking. Story 29. I am not worth anything intrinsically. I'm only of value if I am productive. Story 30. That every interaction with other people is transactional in some way. Nobody ever wants to be around you just because they like you. Story 31. Ice cream truck turns on the music when they're out of ice cream. Story 32. My dad basically conditioned everyone to hide in the room when he had guests over. Now as an adult, I have to fight the urge to not hide in the room when we have guests over because it's considered rude or whatever. Story 33. Parents and other related adults would give me awful anytime I didn't want to kiss, hug my male cousins and relatives, or deal with them physically touching me to wrestle or play, saying that I was hurting their feelings. Basically just teaching me that my feelings didn't matter about my own body. My cousin was a year older than me and had a habit of taking his penis out and making me touch it, or just rubbing up against me or whatever, from when I was about 7 till 10 years old. My parents knew I didn't care. When I was 10, we were at a family wedding and he tried to corner me and made his intentions clear that it was so he could make out with me. I screamed and ran away, hid under a table crying. I was punished for ruining the wedding because he's just being cute because he likes you. And if you had just let him, you wouldn't have ruined the whole day. They stuck with that same narrative, even mentioning how lucky I was that my uncle, whose wedding it was going to come to my wedding after what I did to him. Guess who has boundary issues? Story 34. No kid should be on drugs. I was 11. Diagnosed with ADHD by a psychologist back when that was pretty new. Yeah, every teacher stated some version of if you weren't so smart, I'd hold you back, and I barely graduated high school. Seriously thought I couldn't do math. Flash forward to 28. Get over the stigma. Take good meds. Graduate cum laude with a degree in finance at 32. Turns out I can do pretty heavy equations in my head when the hurricane isn't spinning. Story 35. To be in constant survival mode, like always worrying about the end of the world. Why? Why am I constantly as a child looking over my back in fear of what I will offer to a group if the apocalypse happens? Weird stuff. I thought I was savvy in bunker mode, but really it's trauma-inducing. Story 36. They made me distrust my own intelligence. They talked down to me and treated me like an airhead, giving me a smirk every time I tried to be serious about anything. It wasn't until I was an adult that I learned that I am intelligent and gained self-confidence despite the negative self-esteem they had instilled in me. Story 37. That you are at least partially to blame for anything bad that happens to you. Get beat up by a bully? It's at last partly your fault and you're to be blamed and punished for it. Get bit by a dog? It's at last partly your fault and you're to be blamed and punished for it. Accidentally step on a nail, cut yourself, fall, have an asthma attack? It's at last partly your fault and you're to be blamed and punished for it. A few years ago, my younger brother, we're in our 30s now, was out on the town at night and got mugged. I had to drive him to the hospital. I started blaming him for it and had to pause and ask myself, WTF was I thinking? And right then and there I had an epiphany that the way we were raised was totally screwed up. Story 38. I had a black family that lived next door to us, and my parents called them the N-word so often that I literally thought that was their last name, until I was almost 10, I believe. Story 39. My mom taught me how to forge her signature so she wouldn't have to sign off on my homework every night.